The Empty Parish, Part 1. West Clare, Ireland, October 1847. The rain had fallen for 6 days without pause. It drummed against the slate roof of the parochial house as though determined to wear a hole through it, trickled beneath the warped front door, and seeped into the old stone walls until the entire house smelled of damp turf, wet wool, and smoke. Even the fire in the hearth seemed exhausted. It burned low, fed not by turf, for there was almost none left, but by broken chair legs and splintered shelves that had once held Father Donoghue's treasured library. Father Michael Donoghue sat beside it, his hands stretched towards a meagre warmth. He was only 53, but famine years had added 20 to his face. The deep furrows around his mouth had not come from laughter. His once black hair had surrendered to grey, and the cassock hanging loosely from his shoulders spoke of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to eat until he was satisfied. Across the room, Father Patrick Ryan carefully mended the sleeve on his cassock by candlelight. "I've stitched this elbow 4 times now," Ryan muttered. Donoghue looked up. "It'll last another week." Ryan smiled faintly. "If I'm careful not to bend my arm." It was enough to make them both laugh, not loudly, not for long. Laughter had become something rationed, like food. Outside, the church bell began ringing. One slow toll, then another. Donoghue closed his eyes. Who was it this time? Ryan stood and peered through the rain-soaked window. No one's coming. Then who rang it? Ryan sighed. The wind. Neither priest moved. For nearly 3 years they had become conditioned to every bell meaning another death. Even when no one pulled the rope, their minds expected it. Their parish stretched nearly 15 miles across the western edge of County Clare. Scattered cottages clung to rocky fields that yielded little even in good years. Beyond them lay the Atlantic, restless and grey, forever throwing salt wind against the land. Before the blight, the parish had been poor. Now it had become a place where poverty itself had starved. The potato ridges had turned black for the 3rd successive autumn. Many fields were abandoned altogether. Whole families had disappeared. Some had sailed for America. Many more had simply vanished into the workhouse. Others... Neither priest liked to finish that sentence. The knock came shortly after dawn. 3 slow raps. Ryan opened the door. A young girl stood barefoot in the rain. She could not have been more than 10. Her dress hung from her shoulders like an old sack, and the rain plastered her hair against cheeks already hollow with hunger. She clutched a rosary. "My mam says Da's gone." Ryan knelt. "What is your name?" "Moira." "How long has your father been dead?" The girl frowned. "He isn't dead yet." Ryan looked towards Donoghue. "He can't breathe proper." Donoghue was already pulling on his coat. "Where?" "Ballynahone." Ryan winced. 7 miles, on foot, across flooded roads. They had once owned a sturdy bay horse called Bridget. She had known every lane in the parish. For years she had carried priests to baptisms, weddings, funerals, and the midnight calls to the dying. Last spring they had sold her. Not because they wished to, because 40 pounds of Indian meal would feed dozens of families. The cart had gone with her. Donoghue still remembered watching the farmer lead Bridget away. She had turned once as though wondering why her masters were not following. Ryan had cried after the man disappeared over the hill. He had done so secretly. He believed Donoghue never knew. He was wrong. The journey took nearly 3 hours. Rain had transformed roads into rivers of mud. Twice Ryan slipped. Once Donoghue helped him rise. Neither complained. The little girl simply kept walking. She had made the journey before dawn to fetch them. She would now walk it again. No child should have possessed such endurance. No child should have needed it. The cabin stood alone against a low stone wall. Its roof sagged beneath sodden thatch. The door hung crooked. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. Inside, 6 children watched silently as the priests entered. No one cried. They had passed tears days before. The father lay upon a straw mattress. His breathing rattled in his chest. His wife knelt beside him, clutching his hand. "He waited," she whispered. He said he wouldn't go before the priest came. Donoghue removed his stole. Ryan lit the single candle they had carried. The room became utterly still. The old prayers filled the tiny cabin, Latin words spoken countless times over centuries. Words of mercy, words of hope, words offered when medicine had failed, when governments had failed, when neighbours had nothing left to share. The dying man opened his eyes, and for a brief moment they focused upon the crucifix, then upon his children, then upon his wife, finally upon Donoghue. Thank God. His breathing ceased. The silence afterward felt heavier than the rain outside. Ryan quietly closed the man's eyes. The widow bowed her head. No one wept, not because grief was absent, because exhaustion had become stronger than sorrow. Outside, Ryan leaned against the cabin wall. I counted. Donoghue waited. 32. What? The number of last rites this month. Donoghue nodded. I counted 31. You forgot old Mrs. Maloney. Donoghue stared at the reins. So I did. Ryan spoke softly. We're forgetting the dead. No. Worse. Donoghue looked at him. We're beginning to remember them by number. By the time they reached the parish house, darkness had fallen. Waiting outside were 4 people. Each carried news. An old woman dying in Kilfenora. A child burning with fever near Lisdoonvarna. 2 brothers found dead beside the road. An eviction expected the following morning. Ryan looked from one face to another. We cannot be in 4 places. The oldest man answered quietly, We know, Father. No accusation, only acceptance. That hurt more. Donoghue promised each that one of them would come as soon as possible. He knew some would wait too long. He hated himself for making promises time could not keep. Supper consisted of oat porridge, thin enough to drink. There was no milk, no butter, no bread. Ryan noticed Donoghue pushing half his bowl towards him. I'm not hungry. Ryan raised an eyebrow. You've said that every evening, and every evening it has remained true. Ryan pushed it back. So has mine. Neither touched the extra portion. Eventually Donoghue divided it between them. Before bed, Ryan wandered into the tiny study. Most shelves stood empty. Years later, they had held books collected over 3 decades. Greek classics, church fathers, Irish histories, volumes of theology, poetry, maps, all gone. Sold one by one, first to buy meal, then blankets, then medicine. The silver candlesticks had gone, the grandfather clock, the good table, even Donoghue's mother's wedding ring, which he had kept since her death. Nothing remained now except one battered Bible and a breviary so worn that the binding had dissolved. Ryan ran a hand across the empty shelves. I miss the books. Donoghue answered from the doorway. I miss having parishioners alive enough to borrow them. Late that night, another knock sounded. Both men awoke instantly, and Ryan opened the door. A farmer stood there, soaked through. I'm sorry, fathers. There's nothing to apologise for. My wife... Ryan already knew. How long? She died an hour ago. Donoghue closed his eyes. Did she ask for us? The farmer nodded. Until the end. Neither priest spoke. The man continued. I kept telling her you'd come. His voice broke. I lied. Donoghue placed a hand upon the farmer's shoulder. No. The farmer looked up. We failed her. The priest shook his head. No, my friend. Then, with tears gathering, despite every effort to restrain them, he whispered the words that had haunted him for months. The famine is failing us all. Long after the farmer had gone, neither priest returned to bed. Instead, they walked into the church. The sanctuary lamp flickered before the tabernacle. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. Ryan knelt. Michael? It was one of those rare occasions he used Donoghue's Christian name. Do you ever wonder, he hesitated, whether we're doing enough? Donoghue didn't answer immediately. He looked down the rows of empty pews, not empty because faith had disappeared, empty because so many who once knelt there now rested beneath simple wooden crosses outside. Finally he spoke. No. Ryan looked surprised. I stopped wondering months ago, and I know we aren't. Ryan lowered his head. We cannot. No. We simply cannot. For several minutes neither spoke. The silence was broken only by the wind, sighing through the old church. Then Donoghue stood. Tomorrow we bury 3. Ryan nodded. And after that? or threatened with eviction. Ryan sighed. I heard. We'll go. What can we do? Donahue looked toward the crucifix above the altar. I don't know. His voice was almost lost in the darkness. But if the shepherd stopped standing between the wolves and the flock, he let the sentence remain unfinished. Neither priest needed to hear the ending. Outside, somewhere across the hills of Clare, another family was packing the few possessions they still owned. Another landlord's agent was preparing his notices. Another child was falling asleep, hungry. And another soul was waiting for a priest who might never arrive. The rain had stopped, but no one believed the storm was over. Part 2. West Clare, Ireland, October 1847. The cemetery was running out of room. Father Michael Donahue stood among the weathered Celtic crosses as the first pale light crept over the Atlantic. The ground beneath his boots was heavy with rain, and every step filled with water before he could lift his foot again. A year ago they had buried perhaps 1 or 2 parishioners each week. Now there were days when they buried 4, sometimes 6. The old sexton, Seamus Flaherty, leaned heavily upon his spade. I've begun measuring graves before I know who they're for. Donahue looked at him. I never thought I'd hear a Christian man say such a thing. Seamus stared across the courtyard. I never thought I'd have to. The old man's hands trembled. I've dug graves for 42 years, Father. He pointed towards the newest row. I buried 3 generations of the O'Callaghans over there. His finger moved further along. Now there's not one left alive. Neither spoke. The silence itself seemed to honour the dead. The church bell rang just after sunrise, not for mass, for another funeral. The mourners numbered only 6. There would once have been 50, perhaps 100. Now so many who would have carried the coffin had either emigrated, entered the workhouse, or been buried themselves. The coffin was scarcely larger than a bread chest. Inside lay little Bridget McNamara, 5 years old. Her father carried one handle, her uncle carried the other. The child had become so thin that even her small coffin seemed too large. Father Ryan whispered the prayers. His voice caught only once. When he reached the words, "Suffer the little children to come unto me," he had baptized Bridget himself. She had laughed throughout the ceremony, splashing water onto his cassock, while her mother apologized over and over. Ryan kept telling her, "She'll make a fine fisherman if she keeps throwing water like that." Everyone had laughed, even solemn Father Donahue. Now there was no laughter, only the dull dud of earth striking wood. They had barely returned to the parochial house when another messenger arrived. A teenage boy stood in the yard, breathing hard. "Father!" Ryan hurried outside. "What is it?" "The Walsh family. What about them?" "They're all sick." "How many?" "The whole house." "How many people?" The boy counted upon his fingers. "I think 10. Donahue closed his eyes. 10. 1 cottage. Likely fever. Ryan was already reaching for the small satchel that contained everything they possessed by way of medicine. A few bandages, some herbs, 1 nearly empty bottle of laudanum, a small flask of holy oil, the Blessed Sacrament, nothing more. The smell reached them before the cottage did. It was a scent they had both come to dread. Fever, stale sweat, smoke, rotting straw, human waste. Illness carried its own odour. Inside, every available surface held someone burning with fever. Children, parents, grandparents. An infant whimpered weakly from a basket near the hearth. The oldest daughter, perhaps 16, tried desperately to cool her mother's forehead with a rag dipped in cold water. She looked up hopefully. "The doctor?" Ryan's face fell. "No." Her shoulders slumped only for a moment. Then she nodded. "I thought maybe—" "There are no doctors nearer than Ennis. We have no money anyway." Donahue gently examined each patient. There was little he could offer beyond water, prayer, and encouragement. To the youngest children he smiled. To the parents he spoke quietly. To the eldest daughter he told the truth. "You must keep everyone drinking." She nodded. "If they can. If they can." As they prepared to leave, she caught Ryan by the sleeve. "Father?" "Yes." "If Mam dies," she struggled to finish, "will you come back?" Ryan took both her hands. "I promise." He did not tell her that 3 other families had already asked the same promise that morning. The road home crossed a ridge overlooking half the parish. Donoghue stopped. Below them lay dozens of cottages scattered across the valley. Many no longer had smoke rising from their chimneys. Ryan followed his gaze. "I've begun noticing." "What?" "The silence." Donoghue nodded. "There used to be children. There'd be shouting, or chasing hens, or stealing apples." Ryan smiled faintly. "I once caught 2 boys fishing in Mrs. O'Dee's rain barrel." "I remember." "They insisted trout had wandered in." Donoghue laughed. "I believed them for nearly a minute." The laughter faded quickly. Those boys had died the previous winter. The landlord's notices appeared the following day, nailed to doors, pinned to gateposts, driven into trees. The paper itself seemed harmless enough, the words were not. Notice to quit. Families gathered in little knots after Sunday Mass. No one spoke loudly. Fear had taught them to whisper. Old Martine Kelly approached Donoghue. "They're clearing Drumcliff." "When?" "Thursday." "How many?" 12 families. Ryan looked across the churchyard. 12! The old man nodded. Some paid half. Some paid all they could. It wasn't enough. Donoghue folded the notice carefully and slipped it into his pocket. "We'll be there." That afternoon they visited each of the threatened cottages. No one asked them to stop the evictions. Everyone knew they probably couldn't. Instead, they asked stranger questions. "Will you bless the house? Will you baptize the baby before they come? Can we bury my father now instead of next week?" One elderly widow asked quietly, "Father?" "Yes." "If they throw me out, may I sleep in the church porch?" Donoghue hesitated only long enough for honesty. "Yes." She smiled. "As long as our Lord doesn't mind." "I think he has slept in worse places." Their own meals grew steadily smaller. One evening Ryan emptied the cupboard. Half a sack of oatmeal. A little salt. Nothing else. He laughed softly. "What?" "I've just realised something." Donoghue looked up from his breviary. "We're poorer than half the parish." Donoghue smiled. "Only half?" I was trying to be optimistic. The older priest reached beneath the table. He produced a small cloth bundle. Ryan frowned. "What is that?" Donoghue unfolded it carefully. Inside lay a silver pocket watch. Ryan stared. "I thought—" "So did I. You sold everything." "I forgot this." It had belonged to Donoghue's father, a gift received upon his ordination nearly 30 years before. Ryan knew what the watch meant. "Michael, I'm taking it to Ennis tomorrow." "No." "It'll buy flour." "No." "It'll buy medicine." Ryan's voice grew firm. "You'll have nothing left." Donoghue looked at the watch for a long moment, then closed it gently. "It tells the wrong time these days." Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" "It still believes this parish has a future." The next morning the watch was gone. Thursday arrived beneath cold blue skies, the first dry morning in weeks. It seemed almost cruel that such beauty should accompany suffering. The landlord's party appeared shortly after 10. 2 bailiffs, 4 constables, a driver with 2 carts. Behind them rode the estate agent upon a grey horse. His black coat looked almost new. Children watched from behind stone walls. Women clutched rosaries. Men removed their caps. No one spoke. Father Donoghue and Father Ryan stood waiting at the entrance to the village. The agent reined in his horse. "Gentlemen." Donoghue inclined his head. "Mr. Pembroke." "I trust you won't interfere." Ryan asked calmly, "We're here for our people." "They are my tenants." Donoghue met his eyes. "They are both." For several moments no one moved. The only sound was the wind through the ash trees. Finally Pembroke sighed. "Stand aside." Donoghue did not. Neither did Ryan. "You know those families cannot survive another winter." "The law is the law." Ryan spoke quietly. "There is law." Then he gestured toward the cottages. "And there is justice." Pembroke's expression hardened. "I've no interest in debating theology. Neither have we." Donoghue's voice remained calm. "We're discussing humanity." The constables shifted uneasily. They had buried neighbours too. Pembroke finally nudged his horse forward, and the priest stepped aside, not from fear, but because they knew that if violence began, it would be their parishioners who suffered most. As the first door was broken open, Father Ryan quietly began praying the rosary. One by one, Voices joined him, first a widow, then a child, then an old fisherman. Soon nearly the whole village was praying aloud, not shouting, not cursing, simply praying. The prayers followed every family as they carried what little they owned into the road. The estate agent never looked back, but neither did he speak another word. Late that evening the priests returned to the parish house. Neither removed his boots. Ryan stared into the dying fire. We accomplished nothing. Donoghue looked at him carefully. No? 12 families are homeless. Yes. Their roofs are gone. Yes. They've nowhere to sleep. Donoghue nodded, and then he spoke very softly. They did not face it alone. Ryan looked up. No, they didn't. Outside, beyond the dark windows, scattered campfires now flickered where families had gathered beneath hedges and ruined stone walls. The priest could see them from the upstairs bedroom, tiny flames, each one a household, each one a reminder that tomorrow would ask even more of them than today had. Neither man yet knew that someone else had watched the eviction from the distant hillside, a man whose face was hidden beneath a worn cap, a man who belonged to a secret society whispered about only after dark. And before another fortnight had passed, one of the 2 priests would be approached with an invitation that would place his soul in terrible conflict with his calling.